Hello, and thanks for clicking on the video. If you've seen any of my videos before this one, then you'll know this is what my setup looks like. But I think it's time for an upgrade, so shabam! Ooh, shiny. So I don't need to use my hobby lamp anymore to light my space. I've bought some proper lights that I can use for video. I think I've got an all-round much better light setup here. So here's me testing it on one of my previous Elemental Space Marines. In this video, I'm continuing my Elemental Space Marines series after a bit of a break and coming back, hopefully, better than ever. This video is actually the 5th Elemental Space Marine I've made, and if you're interested in seeing any of the other 4, then all those videos are on my channel for you to check out. Without further ado, let's get into the parts we're going to use to make our Poison Space Marine. I picked up some custom parts off Etsy for this one, and we'll get into what those are exactly later on. I will, of course, need a whole bunch of stuff from Space Marine sprues, so here are some of the Space Marine sprues that I have. Every time I build and paint something from Warhammer, I usually take all the spare bits and put them in a little bag, and then I can use that as extra bits for kit bashing on projects just like this one. I chose a body and legs that I liked, and then it's time to look at the custom parts I'm going to use. So there's this backpack first that I found, and I really like this, and I was immediately drawn to the big tank in the middle of the back. I thought that would be perfect. I got a whole bunch of heads, and from those heads, I liked this one with the long hair, and it kind of looks like it has a bit of a gas mask on, which feels very Poison to me. For shoulders, I thought any of these 3 shoulders could work. We've got skulls and droplets, all could be very related to Poison stuff. Looking at sprues, I wanted this Poison gas grenade. I just thought that's perfect. Couldn't pick anything else. And even though we've already got a knife arm on the Water Marine, I did think another knife would be perfect here, so I went for a smaller knife, and I have good plans to make it look more poisony down the line. This character's going to need a bag to hold his poisons, so I cut one of those out. He's probably going to need a gun, because he can't just run around only with a knife. And then there's a whole load of other little bits that I'm going to try and use on this miniature to make it feel like Poison. And this time around, I'm going to care just a little bit less about the job and the stuff in the universe, and more just about the rule of cool. What I think looks cool is what I'm going to make. So I began gluing all the parts together with plastic glue. I put some legs on, put some arms on, and then we had the core frame. From here, I'm going to have to add some of the custom bits, and because they're resin, I'm going to need to use super glue instead. For the backpack, I cut the lanterns off the bottom of it, because we don't really need those. This guy's not about light or fire or anything like that. And then I cut this weird spiky arch on the top of it off as well. It's a really cool thing, it's just, it wasn't what I was looking for Poison. I stuck the gun and the pouch on the back, and I also included a piece of meat, and that came from the crew kill team that I've already built up before. Now, there sometimes comes a time when I'm making Elemental Space Marines where I do something a bit wacky, and this time I decided to take Eldari guns from my Void Scar Corsairs and cut off little parts of the guns, and then I would add them to the backpack. And what I was going to do is I was going to replace these areas that have big fans with small bits of the gun that I'm going to hollow out and turn into what hopefully looks like some kind of nozzle that can spray poison. I think this piece is from the Space Marine kill team, and it caught my eye because I wanted the little pieces on top, and I'm going to stick those to the top of my backpack. They're going to be like poison containers. I had this idea to stick a grenade on the back of the backpack as if it could be refilled, but unfortunately it fell off, and then I decided not to stick it back on again. Also, I thought it'd be fun here to just show my finger and a piece of champagne cork to show the scale of these things. I mean, sticking these tiny little things on the top of this backpack was really fiddly. Every single one of my Elemental Space Marines has a chest doodad, something that I stick to the chest that helps sort of represent them. So I gave this guy bones. As I have most of the miniature assembled at this point, it's time to turn my attention to the base, and I didn't want to go too complicated with this kind of base. I wanted to do something that would just be instantly recognizable as poison related. So I went for some poison pools on the ground. I used a couple of slate pieces, and then I used a muddy ground texture paste, and then I left some patches around the rocks so that I could paint some green in later that would be my poison pools. When I make these elemental space marines, I like to try and sculpt something, even if it's just something really small, because it helps keep the sculpting muscles fresh. But sculpting organic-y shapes like poison drops is really, really tricky, and that's what I was trying to do here. I've only included a few clips because this took me many hours off camera trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do with this. In the end, I decided to make tiny spheres that I would then roll on parts of my fingers to try and get a little bit of like a droplet shape. And once again, this was extremely fiddly, and I dropped the pieces loads, and I squished loads of pieces by accident, and yeah, it was a bit of a pickle. But in the end, after a lot of struggle, I managed to stick 2 of those droplets to the end of the blade, looking like drippy poison. I did, in the end, decide to add some green stuff around that to help shape it more as well. And to try and add a 3rd droplet, because those drops that you just saw, they actually ended up falling off while this was drying overnight. In this clip, I'm snipping off some of the shoulders because the backpack wouldn't fit with the tall parts of the shoulder pad that I had there. And with all that, here's a look at the miniature, fully built and primed. One cool little thing that I added here was a tiny bit of sludgy goo coming out of one of the poison shooters on the backpack, which I think is going to be really cool once I've painted it up. I'm going to do things a little bit differently this time and start with the base. So here are all the paints that I used to paint it. One of the key things I was doing here for the base was I was tinting my greys and my browns with a bit of green to make everything have a bit of a greenish hue. I wanted this ground to look like poison lands, so maybe like caustic lands, and therefore a little bit of green was important to help try and sell that. And one thing I wanted to quickly discuss while I paint the rest of this base is to discuss about why I chose poison as an element at all. Because I've already done the 4 main elements, I knew that for the next set of elemental marines I was going to make, I'd have to pull on some more obscure elements. Poison is an element that you can find in some card games and other video games as well. And it's probably also perfect just because within the Warhammer 40k lore, the Space Marines probably use poison in some form anyway. And if you want to, you can think of poison as like a subcategory of the earth element, or maybe even a subcategory of the water element. Going back to the base, I'm now painting the poison pools, where I'm basically just going to work up from a dark green to a much lighter yellowy green. And I'm also taking my highlights on the rocks around it up to a much more greeny grey. And with the painting on the base completed, this is what it looked like. I did just make a video all about transparent water effects, but I decided not to use them on this base because I didn't think I'd really need them. They'd be a bit overkill, and I wasn't going to have the depth with the texture paste to make a real, like, deep pool. But now it's time to move on to the main miniature. And the main color that I'm going to be using on this Space Marine is purple. Specifically, the 2 purples you've just seen, and I'm going to be using the dark purple for the inner chest area and shoulders, and then the light purple for the arms and the legs. That will match the painting style of all the other elemental Space Marines that have a dark inner core and lighter extremities. I don't want to spend a long time on base coats because everybody knows how to do those, but after I painted in the dark purple in the middle and on the backpack, I had to test, once again, my light colors, as I've done on previous Elemental Marines, to see which one would work best. And the one I like is the top left thigh, so I turned the whole thing into that color. It's called Lustful Purple, and it's in Vallejo's game color range. And now I've painted the arms that color as well, I'm ready to start progressing onto other parts of the miniature. Initially, I thought I wanted to paint the chest detail and the shoulder detail a really dark black green. But I have to admit that at the end of the paint job, I ended up turning this into just black and grey. Because by the end, I thought the miniature had plenty of green elsewhere and didn't really need it there as well. Then I base coated in some of the other parts. I did the black areas between the armor plates, and I did the hair in black as well. Then I came around to the back and I did all the bags and leather stuff in a brown. I did a bit of highlighting on the chest details, but I'm going to skip over that quickly because I ended up making it all black, as I mentioned before. To get started on the main parts of the armor, I ended up going in with shadow colors, so a nice dark purple, where I basically just added black to the purple I'd already used, and then I started applying this on all the areas facing away from the light. After that, I started to highlight my dark purple areas, and I think I just added ice yellow to the paint that I was using for the base coat. On the previous Elemental Space Marines, I just did an edge highlighting style. On this one, I'm going to do a little bit more of a volume painting style. I just want to see if I can try and paint this guy better, and I can always go back to the first 4 Elemental guys and I can paint them again better later on if I want to. I kept increasing the brightness of my purple using the ice yellow, and then kept adding that in smaller areas facing towards the light. I didn't want this armor to read as non-metallic metal. I just wanted it to be like a painted surface. So I didn't want to go for super bright contrast and lots of like big white reflections. So I kept things on the subtle side for these highlights. And then, so that he doesn't look mismatched, I had to do the same thing to the legs and the arms. So I'm going to skip over that much quicker, but I did basically the same thing, adding more white to this very light purple, and with a tiny bit of ice yellow just to get my highlight colors. One of the great things about painting Space Marines is that there is no shortage of references of where to put your highlights. So you can always Google images of Space Marines and see where other people have put highlights on similar models so that you know exactly where you need to put yours too. After highlighting the light purple areas, I highlighted the leather parts, and I did that with grunge brown from Vallejo Game Color, which I was putting on top of a charred brown base coat. Knowing that I was going to do another highlight on this, I went quite thick on my grunge brown application here. To get a highlight color that I was happy with, I think I just added ice yellow to the grunge brown and got a much lighter brown that I could then use to highlight all the edges and do a little bit of scratchy texturing on as well. After that, it was the most exciting thing because then it was time to paint the poison. There is poison all over the place on this guy. He is a walking hazard. So I started with the big old tank on the backpack and all the pipes that run around it. And then I painted the big old cloud coming out of his smoke grenade. And if you're curious, I think I was using Scorpy Green from Vallejo Game Color for this. I painted the little bit of sludge coming out of one of the poison shooters, and then I painted all of the poison on the knife. I didn't forget about the 2 little thingies on the top of the backpack either, or any of the big old tubes running around the sides. And to enhance the poison effect even more, I needed to highlight it. So I started to get brighter, yellowy greens and layer them up all over the top of what I've just painted. I was aiming to try and do a light source from the front and the back, so there's a bit of shadow in the top, middle, and on the sides, and using that I was trying to get my highlights in the right places. There is only one tiny bit of skin on this miniature, his tiny little face that's popping out, so I did my usual skin recipe of Bugman's Glow, Cadian Flesh Tone, and Kislev Flesh. Having a quick stop to check, this is what I've got so far. And to continue, I began to highlight his wonderful luscious locks. To make my highlight greys, I just added ice yellow to my black, and it helped me make more light greys that can highlight various areas. The poison needed more highlights, so I kept going. I think I went all the way up to Afterglow from Army Painter Fanatic, which is an extremely light, pale green. There were some other small details around the model, like some bones and his shoulder bits, which, again, I turned those to black in the end. So even though I'm showing a little bit of painting them green, they don't stay that way. And with all the bone bits, I basically just covered them in leather brown, and then I covered them in bone white, and then did a little bit of highlighting with a bit of ice yellow and white added to my bone white. These 3 lovely paints you can see on the screen are what I'm going to use to start painting the meat. For some reason, when I saw this dangling meat in my bits, it made me think of the Monster Hunter video game franchise and how you can get poisoned meat and put it on the ground and make the monsters come over and eat it, and then it poisons them. So that's what I wanted to do here. This is poisoned meat that this guy is going to use when he's hunting beasts or anything else that will eat it, basically. I can imagine that means this guy probably won't be that effective against Nurgle. So he probably doesn't fight a lot of Nurgle. I can imagine the Nurgle are just resistant to poison. They basically just are poison. So that would be a bad matchup. He probably hunts other stuff instead. What I did on the meat was I basically covered it in decomposed flesh, and I mixed green into the decomposed flesh to get a greenish tint. I used whole red and gory red to basically add in a bit of red bloodiness to the meat. And then it was time to do the last big thing here, which is to paint some metals. And instead of using true metallic metals like I did on the previous Elemental Space Marines, I'm going to try and shift to using non-metallic metal from here on out. As I said before, I could probably go back and paint all the old models with non-metallic metal in the future when I'm better, but I really want to keep practicing this technique, so I've got to keep painting it on lots of different miniatures. I've got to keep trying. I'm using the AK 3rd Gen non-metallic metal steel set for this, and I'm just working up through the colours all the way from anthracite grey to graphite, then to silver grey, and then pure white for a tiny dot highlight. Because I aim to get a video out each week, I didn't have super loads of time to blend this as smoothly as I'd liked, but some of the non-metallic metal, especially on the back here for this backpack, did turn out really good. So I think all my practice is paying off, and hopefully in the not too distant future, I'll be pretty consistent with this technique. So as we near the end and I finish up these metal details, I just want to say that the Elemental series is going to work a little bit differently from here on out on the channel. I'm not going to be doing one a week. I'm going to be doing them every now and then. I definitely still want them to be a part of the channel. They were my most popular videos back those months ago when I did them. And I know that people like them, so I want to keep making them, but I don't want them to be the only thing on my channel. So I'm going to space them out a bit so you can look forward to them, and please subscribe if you want to be aware when these new Elemental Space Marine videos come out. Now let's take a look at the finished miniature. So here he is. And there are a few things I did off camera that I just want to mention. I went round with some black paint and did some battle damage. I also added a decal to his shoulder. This time I went for a skull. And as I mentioned previously, I turned his shoulder and his chest black with grey highlights. I think he looks great. I think he screams poison all over, and I think he'll make a great addition to the Elemental Space Marines. As I mentioned at the start, I had new lighting for this video, and over the next few videos, my lighting might change a little bit because I'm still going to be experimenting with my new equipment to see what works best. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching the video, and I hope that you'll join me again for the next one.